Chapter 37, Section 2, continued. So in 1929, towards the end of 1929, a worldwide depression begins. Most industrialized nations were affected by this. It didn't really affect the Soviet Union because their economy was already kind of depressed, controlled by Stalin there. But this is going to be called the Great Depression. And factories around the world started closing, and millions are going to lose their jobs. If you were to look in the United States and Britain, 1 out of 4 people were out of work. In Germany, 2 out of 5 were out of work. Banks failed, and people lost their savings. People lost their homes and are living in cardboard and tin shacks. In Germany, prices skyrocketed. Money was worth so little that people would light their stoves with it because the firewood was worth more. So let's take a look at Britain and the United States. We had these long democratic traditions. And the voters want they want the government to help. They want to help the government. They want help from the government. Franklin Roosevelt here in the United States is going to set up something called the New Deal. The New Deal was going to try to provide all sorts of different agencies that would be set up to help people out. It's called alphabet soup, is what they called it, because they all had these acronyms. When it comes to relief agencies, you've got the Civilian Conservation Corps, which is the CCC. You've got the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. The CCC gave jobs and planted trees and built dams, and the WPA built roads and bridges, and artists and writers got work, and the TVA built dams for electrical power. You've got reform like the Social Security Administration, which would make Social Security laws, which would have money for elderly and for orphans and things like that. You saw things like this in the United States and even in Britain. But in Germany and Italy, there weren't long democratic traditions. Germany had only had an elected government since World War I. Germans thought that the representatives were spending too much time debating, and they want a strong leader so they can have fast action. In Italy, you're going to see a dictatorship come about. Country ruled by one person that had absolute authority, and that's going to be in 1922. Benito Mussolini come into power. He was the leader of the fascist party in Italy. So let's go back to Germany here, because in Germany, they were annoyed with this representative, this democracy, and they wanted a strong leader. Well, in 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes the chancellor, which is like the prime minister. And he very soon after abolishes the republic. And Hitler becomes a dictator, der Führer, or the leader. And he called his government the Third Reich, which means like the Third Empire. And he is going to lead the National Socialist Party, or simply known as the Nazis. It was this violent political group, and their symbol was the swastika, this hooked black cross. Well, the Germans were angry over the Treaty of Versailles. They thought Hitler could make Germany strong again, economically, politically. And they were angered by that treaty. Hitler is going to outlaw all parties but the Nazi Party. Hitler had books burnt. If they talked about democracy, Hitler had them burnt. Hitler created a secret police. Hitler controlled the media. Hitler blamed Jews for all of Germany's trouble. They weren't part of his master race that he had plans for. He said that the Jews took businesses and jobs, and so Germany took them back. Jews weren't allowed to have schools. They weren't allowed to have medical care. They weren't allowed to vote. They had to wear this yellow six-pointed star to identify them. So Germany is under the control of Hitler and his policies. Peace is going to be threatened here very soon by Germany, Italy, and Japan. They are going to decide to work together. Looking at Italy, 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia. The Italians were bitter after World War I. They thought they should have gotten more land. They got hardly any. And the League of Nations can't do anything about it except for say, hey, you shouldn't do that. Hitler is going to announce his goal to unite all German people. Marches his troops into the Rhineland. The Rhineland was part of Germany that the military was not allowed to be in, according to the Treaty of Versailles. He ignored it. In 1938, he sends his troops into Austria. He also starts demanding parts of Czechoslovakia, that he said had Germans in it. The British and the French are watching all of this happen again, but they're scared of another World War I. And they're going to follow an idea called appeasement, giving in to the demands of an aggressor. And so Czechoslovakia is going to be allowed to fall under German rule in 1939. Britain and France won't stop him. They're afraid it'll start a war. Out there with Japan, the military is going to rule in Japan. And they want more land and natural resources. Japan is mostly rocky islands. They need more resources. They needed to make the economy stronger. So what you see is in 1931, Japan invades Manchuria, and then in 1937, Japan invades mainland China. It was in 1937 that Japan signs a friendship treaty with Germany and Italy, and they become known as the Axis powers. And then in 1939, Germany signs a treaty with the Soviet Union that they won't attack each other. With the Soviet Union appeased, Hitler feels safe now to take more land. And on September 1st of 1939, Hitler takes Poland. And so what you have happen in Poland is this. You have Germany closing in from the west. You had the Soviets closing in on Poland from the east. And Great Britain and France have finally had enough, and they declare war on Germany. World War II has now begun.